Greetings, Starfighters. Welcome to episode 3 of season 9 of Shameless Cashgrab. And as I said at the end of the last episode, today's will also be based on a book. This one by... Wait, here it is. Robert Louis Stevenson. Yep, the author of... Wait, that was his, right? Hold on a second. I want to make sure that I am not... okay. Okay, yeah, Treasure Island. Treasure Island was when it is. Okay. Wait, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Was it? Ah. Okay. Anyway, Robert Louis Stevenson. Yeah, that was... I'm not going to edit that. This is The Black Arrow from 1947. So it was actually made the year before the previous movie, The Prince of Thieves. Which is odd. The rest of these are in chronological order. This is the last 1940s movie on the set, however. The final two of the set are from 1950 and 1960, respectively. But we'll get to those when we get to those. Today we are doing, again, The Black Arrow. And I can't believe it took me this long to actually hold up the set on screen. I usually start with this. Okay, so I have watched The Black Arrow, which could be from 1947, as the DVD said, but also from 1948. The internet seems to be conflicted about that. Plot summary, courtesy of Letterboxd. A young British nobleman comes back from fighting in the War of the Roses to discover that his father has been murdered by an old family friend who is now an outlaw. However, he becomes suspicious about the exact circumstances of his father's death and determines to find out exactly what happened. So, why is this on a Robin Hood movie set exactly? I mean, I learned from a review of this movie I saw on Letterboxd while I was doing a copy and paste of the plot summary that this movie reuses costumes from The Bandit of Sherwood Forest. Not that you could tell, given this movie's in black and white. But honestly, that seems to be the extent of the connection here. But the movie's only just started, for me as I'm writing this, so who knows? Maybe this is just a Robin Hood story set in an atypical time period. That's been done before, to, mixed results.
Come gather around me, space travelers surround me, hark now to the ballad of Rockin' Robin Hood.
We open as our as-yet unnamed hero first sees a sign posted outside a ruined castle before moving on with his horse to get a drink from a stream, before an arrow flies out and strikes a tree near him. After looking around and not seeing who shot it, he finds a note attached to the arrow. We learn our hero's name here, and it's Sir Richard Shelton, and the note is warning him to be careful. In rhyme. Okay. Well, we have an R name at least. That's something. This is Witch's Mountain all over again, isn't it? To this day, I have no idea how that movie ended up on the vampire set for season 3. But back to this movie. Richard rides off, and it goes from day to night, and Richard arrives at what I am pretty sure is the same castle matte painting and front gate set from the last movie this season. For the love of... Is this why? Is the reason The Black Arrow on this Robin Hood set because of how many assets from another Robin Hood movie it reused? That's like calling Space Mutiny a Battlestar Galactica movie. I guess this castle is Richard's home as opposed to the one from the opening, as a lot of the people here know him, and when informed he's arrived, a group of men, one of whom we learn is Richard's uncle, discuss how to break the news to Richard that his father's dead. He's told the father was murdered by a family friend, Sir John Sedley, and it relates to the War of the Roses. Richard has a hard time believing it, though, and given how early in the movie this is, and also because of what I already said when I read out the plot summary, it's safe to assume he's right. Richard's uncle also claims that his father's murderer was executed. If this is true remains to be seen. It's just as likely that they are only saying this so Richard won't go looking for him and possibly learn what actually happened. Oh, and the uncle, Sir Daniel, is played by an actor who was in The Bandit of Sherwood Forest. Did I mention a character named Fitzherbert while I was doing that? That was him. I am being reminded of a movie I hated. Not a good omen going forward. Richard heads off to his room, and immediately any mystery, what little there was, is wiped out as the other men remaining in the room immediately start asking Daniel if he thinks Richard bought their story, to which he says it doesn't matter. Damn, not even gonna pretend to have any tension, movie? We fade in the next morning to Richard being awoken by the sounds of a man being whipped in the courtyard, with a guard demanding information about the beaten man's leader. Richard comes out and orders the whipping to stop, saying it was not allowed under his father's watch, and the guard says it was Daniel's orders. Richard talks to Daniel, and Daniel acquiesces to Richard's no-torture edict, at least for now, and announces the daughter of the man who we're told murdered Richard's father will be put in Daniel's care until she can be married off. She's going to be the love interest this movie, isn't she? So, to be fair...
Okay, now to be fair.
To be fair.
To be fair.
All the political intrigue going on here by itself isn't bad. In fact, if one were to describe these scenes to me before I started watching this movie, I'd be interested. What hurts this section of the film is that the actors are underselling it. I can't even call it bad, because at least bad acting would leave an impression. This is just... I want to use the word perfunctory here, but I'm not 100% sure I'm using it right. What Richard and Daniel and a guy named Oliver are talking about isn't dull, but the way it's being presented sure as hell is. Moving on, Richard takes Daniel's advice to go and pick up the daughter, Joanna, from a convent, and she's as bland as everybody else in this movie so far. After some literal both-sidesing from Richard, the guy who shot the arrow with the note earlier in the movie returns, along with the rest of the merry men, Lancasterites, who've been hiding in the forest since the end of the war. The bowman hits the lead guard of the group, escorting Richard and Joanna right in the chest, and just the way he, the guard, I think is Applewaith, something like that? Apple something. The way he underreacts, it just automatically made me think...
Message for you, son.
The arrow has another note on it, also making me think of that moment, which Richard removes before the wounded but not dead guard is carried off, and it's another poem that honestly reads like a letter from a serial killer. We then get a scene with the Lancasterites at their camp, and wouldn't you know it, the supposedly dead Sir John Sedley. I like this scene, because the characters in it talk like they're actually filming a movie and aren't just at the table read. Anyway, the lead guard who was shot with the arrow is one of 4 names on a list at the camp, as one of the 4 men who know what actually happened to Richard's father, and this is where we get a title drop. The arrows with the note on them are black, though I didn't pick up on that at first since this is a black and white movie. And as title drops go, it's one of the better ones, honestly. I mean, I love the Lord of the Rings movies, but those title drops... yeah, not even Ian McKellen could keep them from being a little awkward. Anyway, Richard is starting to get suspicious, or at least more openly suspicious, and tries to question the dying man, Apple something, about what really happened to his father. But the guy sticks to his side of the story right up to the end. He may have been one of the bad guys, but I respect commitment to the bit. Richard goes to confront the next target on the list, according to the murder poem, and this guy, his name is Hatch, sticks to his story, but also starts acting shifty the second Richard starts questioning him. The 3 remaining villains of the piece have an argument about what to do about Richard when they spot him and Joanna through a window, and I guess our romantic subplot has started. A shame, the movie was starting to get interesting. Oh, okay, good. When we shift the focus of the scene to them talking, it's about the main plot. Okay, I'm back on board now. Though I'm not big on how quick Richard is to walk into a situation he suspects to be dangerous without his sword, and also leaving one of the people he's suspicious of within stabbing distance, and slightly behind him. He's kind of an idiot. The exchange between him and Daniel is also a bit too quiet, at least in my opinion. Mileage may vary there. An arrow makes its way through the window with another threat on it, while Daniel is swearing on a Bible. When he goes off to inform the guards to search for the bowman, he overhears Richard ask Oliver to make the same oath, and Oliver tries to wiggle his way out of it. Clearly religious enough that the thought of swearing on a Bible before lying doesn't sit with him, though obviously Daniel had no issue with that. When Richard leaves, Daniel marches in and calls Oliver a coward and reveals that he knows from the wording of the notes that Sedley is alive. He orders Hatch to make sure neither Richard nor Joanna leave the castle. Joanna intercepts Richard at his room, having grabbed his sword with the intent to kill Daniel, now certain of the truth, but she talks him down, convincing him that killing Daniel for personal vengeance, or at least doing so now, will only make things worse. She also reveals to him that she knows her father is still alive. They're able to escape, well, almost, after Richard defeats Hatch in a sword fight that's okay. Doesn't look like they used any stunt doubles, which is probably why it comes off as a little clumsy in places, but it's not terrible. Richard spares Hatch's life in exchange for being told how to get past one of the locked doors, having Joanna tie him up before they leave. The next sword fight is much better when Richard takes on 3 guys at once. Stop giggling. Anyway, Richard is able to fight off most of the guards, but Joanna is captured, and he takes a leap into the moat to get away, though he does get wounded by a crossbow bolt before we fade cut to the next morning. So the bowman from earlier finds Richard unconscious but alive, and brings him back to the camp from earlier in the movie. We fade cut to the end of his conversation with Sedley, apologizing for leaving Joanna behind, but he's understanding of the situation, and he fills Richard, and the audience, in on the details of the Elder Shelton's murder via flashback. And Richard's father is played by the same actor who played the Elder Robin Hood in Bandit of Sherwood Forest. Damn it, movie, I'm trying to like you here. Quit reminding me of that other turkey. We also learn how Sedley survived, and it's the better part of the flashback, both in terms of story and acting. After this sequence, the movie does something I appreciate. They actually give Richard enough time to heal before sending him back into action. I'd worried they'd pull that thing some movies do, where the hero hides how badly hurt he is for no real reason, other than to have it be believable when the villain almost triumphs. It can work, and I'm not against it on principle, I just don't think it would have been a good fit for this movie. Later on, after Daniel has put a bounty out on Richard, he manages to capture Sedley, though not before losing some of his guards to Richard and the other Lancasterites, though they lose several men themselves. Hatch rides off, and Richard pursues in a chase scene that is quite possibly my favorite part of the movie. The knife fight at the end doesn't quite live up to the promise, but yeah, it was the 40s. As expected, Richard kills Hatch. You know, considering I referenced Battlestar Galactica earlier, that is a somewhat awkward sentence. Anyway, we fade back to the castle where Joanna arrives at Daniel's office, or whatever the equivalent term they used back then was, and she's been summoned, and he creeps on her as I expected, but the scene doesn't bother me that much because she does not take his shit, even a little. The acting isn't stellar, but it's not terrible, so I can roll with this. Daniel is not a complete idiot, however, and doesn't expect her to just go along with marrying him of her own volition, so he shows her her captured father being marched through the courtyard. Richard and the bowman, who's been using the black arrows the whole movie, the only name we're given for him is Lawless, by the way, hatch a rescue plan that involves friar robes, and they almost manage to rescue Sedley. I was a bit confused at one point where it looked like Richard was setting up an ambush, but instead he let himself get captured in a way that honestly could have gotten him killed, which was rather dumb. In fact, this part goes on really long. I'm starting to think there wasn't a plan and Richard just let himself get caught because the movie was going to run short. Lawless was able to kill Oliver and delay the forced wedding before being captured himself. They are only able to escape because the one guard left behind in the dungeon was kind of an idiot. Yeah, that's a little disappointing, honestly. But, you know, maybe it was that way in the book. I don't know. Ultimately, this leads to a trial by combat between Richard and Daniel. This involves a joust, and I'm a little confused by something here. Why didn't Daniel try to cheat? We've seen him lying with his hand placed on a Bible, something even his closest co-conspirator refused to do. Why would he choose to be honorable now in a fight to the death with an experienced and younger soldier looking to avenge his father? I mean, it's a dramatic sequence, I can give the filmmakers that much credit, but it just needles at me. Well, it did until it got to the point where it actually looked like Daniel was going to win without cheating. Did not expect that. Damn, this fight is brutal by 1940s standards. Shit, I think this would be considered brutal by 50s and 60s standards, too. Richard does win, though, managing to impale Daniel with the broken half of one of the lances that got smashed earlier in the fight. It's certainly a tight one, though. Richard looks like he's about to pass out after Daniel's body falls off his horse, and in the next scene, practically half his head is bandaged. And thus, we reach one last kiss between Richard and Joanna, and then the end screen. I think there was also an archbishop involved at some point. I don't know, whatever. Random thoughts I had while watching the movie. 1. I actually had the opposite problem when it came to finding poster images for this movie than the previous movie. I actually had almost too many to choose from. You may have already noticed, unless you've just been letting us play in the background, which, hey, fair. 2. There was a moment when Richard took out the note from the arrow earlier in the movie to look at after he's returned to his room, and I actually thought the movie might show us the warning/poem again. Thankfully, the filmmakers didn't expect their audience to have the short-term memory of goldfish. Good on them for that. 3. When I went back to the Letterboxd page at one point to look up the spelling of something, which admittedly I didn't need to do since nobody but me ever sees the script, but I digress, I noticed that the graph that shows this film's average user ratings resembles flipping someone off. I don't love this movie either, but honestly, that would have been way more appropriate for Bandit of Sherwood Forest. I joke, of course, because for it to look that much like a middle finger, that would have to mean that most of the ratings are average and Bandit of Sherwood Forest suck, but, roll with the joke, people. 4. During one of their dialogue scenes, after Richard compliments Joanna on her intelligence, Joanna utters the line that England will not truly be great until it's had a queen or two, and I honestly just cringed at that. Fuck off with that girl boss shit. Yeah, I probably just made a lot of people mad with that one, but, but y'all should know by now, I am not enamored of capitalism. Or monarchy. A member of my family actually asked me if I was going to watch the coronation, a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, no, why would you think that? Final verdict. I must again ask why this is on a Robin Hood set. What similarities there are to any Robin Hood story I've ever seen is superficial. This has the aesthetics of a Robin Hood movie, but nothing else. Still, even with that issue, I'd take this over the Bandit of Sherwood Forest any day. It's not as good as it could be, but considering the amount of reused materials from another movie, or movies, on display here, I'm guessing budget was a concern. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I think a modern remake of this could absolutely kick ass in the hands of the right creative team. Say, let the people who made Violent Night take a crack at this, eschew the unnecessary Robin Hood aesthetic, and you've got yourself a nice, tense, bloody action period piece. And hey, at least most of this movie's villains, a whole 3/4, get killed on screen this time. Honestly, that alone is enough to put it over Prince of Thieves in the rankings, though admittedly just barely. Tune in next time when we kick off Disc 2 of the Robin Hood Origins set with 1950s Rogues of Sherwood Forest. Apparently this one also involves a son of Robin Hood, but this one's name is also Robin as opposed to Robert, so I'm willing to give it a chance. It's just... Can you blame me for being concerned, given the already present similarities between the description on the back of the DVD and the movie with a similar title and premise that is, as of this writing, the single worst Robin Hood movie I have ever seen? Have fun, stay safe, pray for Mojo. We then get a scene with the Lancasterites at their camp, and wouldn't you know it, the supposedly dead John Sir Headley. John Sir Headley? What the fuck? Okay.